The day I found those letters in my attic, my entire world crumbled and rebuilt itself in the span of a few hours. I'm Dorothy, and at 73 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my family's history. I was wrong. So devastatingly, completely wrong that it still takes my breath away. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I'd been living in my childhood home for the past 5 years, ever since my husband Robert passed away. My children had insisted I move back to the family house after selling my condo, claiming they wanted me close to my roots. "It'll be good for you, Mom," my daughter Patricia had said. "All those memories, all that history. If only I'd known then what kind of history was actually buried in those walls." I was up in the attic looking for my mother's old china set. Patricia was hosting Thanksgiving that year, and she'd asked if I could bring Mother's good dishes. "You know, the ones with the blue roses that Grandma treasured so much," she'd said over the phone. The irony of those words would hit me like a freight train just a few hours later. The attic was dusty and cramped, filled with decades of accumulated memories. Boxes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting lined the walls. Christmas decorations, school papers, photo albums 1950 to 1960. I was moving a particularly heavy box marked linens when I heard it. A soft thud as something fell behind the old wardrobe that had been pushed against the far wall. I squeezed behind the wardrobe, my arthritic knees protesting with every movement, and felt around until my fingers closed on what felt like a small wooden box. It was stuck tight against the wall, as if someone had deliberately wedged it there. After several minutes of careful maneuvering, I managed to work it free. The box was beautiful carved mahogany with brass corners, about the size of a shoebox but much heavier. There was no lock, just a simple brass clasp that opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, were dozens of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I lifted them out. The return addresses made my heart stop. Margaret Sinclair, 1247, Elm Street, Portland, Oregon. Margaret Sinclair. My sister Margaret, who had died in a car accident when she was 19. At least, that's what I'd been told my entire life. The first letter was dated March 15, 1954. I would have been 8 years old. With shaking hands, I unfolded the delicate paper and began to read. "My dearest mother, I hope this letter finds you well. The baby is growing so beautifully. She has your eyes, Mother, and the sweetest smile. I wish you could see her, but I understand why that's impossible right now. Please tell Dorothy I love her and miss her terribly. I hope someday I can explain everything to her myself. The family I'm staying with is very kind, and they've helped me find work at the local hospital. I'm learning to be strong just like you taught me. All my love, Margaret." I read the letter 3 times before the words truly sank in. Margaret hadn't died in a car accident. She'd been alive, living in Oregon, and she'd had a baby. My hands moved to the next letter, dated 6 months later. "Dearest Mother, I received your letter and I understand your concerns, but I can't keep pretending I don't exist. Dorothy has a right to know she has a sister who loves her. And she has a right to know she has a niece. Little Sarah's walking now and she says Mama and Grandma, though she'll never get to meet the grandma she's named after. I'm enclosing a photograph. Please at least show Dorothy the picture. She's family. All my love, Margaret." There was indeed a photograph tucked into the letter, a black and white image of a young woman who looked exactly like me at that age, holding a toddler with curly hair and bright eyes. On the back, someone had written in Margaret's familiar handwriting, "Sarah Marie Sinclair, age 18 months, with her mama." My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might collapse right there in the dusty attic. I fumbled through more letters, each one revealing another piece of a puzzle I never knew existed. Margaret had been pregnant at 19, unmarried, and instead of letting her stay home and weather the scandal, my parents had sent her away. They told everyone, including me, their 8-year-old daughter, that she had died in a car accident. But she hadn't died. She had lived, raised a daughter, worked as a nurse, and written letter after letter begging to come home, begging to see me, begging our parents to let her back into the family. The letters spanned 15 years, each one more heartbreaking than the last. One letter from 1962 nearly broke me. "Mother, I saw in the Portland newspaper that Dorothy graduated valedictorian from high school. I'm so proud of her, but it breaks my heart that I couldn't be there. I wanted to send a graduation gift, but I know you just return it. I'm a head nurse now at Portland General Hospital. I have my own small house, and Sarah is doing wonderfully in school. She's 8 now, the same age Dorothy was when you sent me away. Sometimes I wonder if you tell people Sarah's dead too. Please, I'm begging you, let me come home for Dorothy's wedding. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I just want to see my sister on the most important day of her life. I remembered my wedding day in 1963. I'd been so sad that Margaret wasn't there. But Mother had said it would be too painful to talk about her. I'd accepted that explanation because I was 21 and thought my parents knew best. But Margaret had been alive, wanting to be there, and they'd kept her away. The final letter was dated 1969, and the handwriting was shaky, uncertain. Mother, the doctors say I don't have much time left. The cancer has spread and they've done all they can. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness anymore. I've made peace with the choices you and Father made. But I'm begging you one last time. Please tell Dorothy about me. Tell her about Sarah. My daughter will be alone in the world when I'm gone, and she deserves to know she has an aunt who would love her. I'm enclosing Sarah's address and telephone number. She's 15 now, and she's going to need family. Please don't let your pride rob Dorothy of the chance to know her only niece. I forgive you for everything, but please don't let this secret die with me. All my love, Margaret. And there it was. My sister had died in 1969, not in 1954 as I'd been told, but in 1969, alone and heartbroken, still hoping her family would accept her back. She'd left behind a daughter, my niece Sarah, who would now be in her 60s. I sat in that dusty attic for 3 hours, reading and rereading every letter. Margaret had become a nurse, just like she'd always dreamed. She'd raised a daughter who was apparently brilliant and kind, based on the proud updates in the letters. She'd lived a full life despite being cut off from her family, but she'd never stopped loving us. She'd never stopped hoping. The most devastating part was realizing that my parents had received every single letter. The box proved they'd kept them all, hidden them all, and taken the secret to their graves. Mother had died in 1995, Father in 1998, and neither had ever breathed a word about Margaret being alive for 15 years after her supposed death. But the letters weren't the only thing in that box. At the bottom, wrapped in a separate piece of tissue paper, was a birth certificate for Sarah Marie Sinclair, born March 3, 1954, to Margaret Rose Sinclair. Father listed as unknown. And beneath that, a death certificate for Margaret Rose Sinclair, dated November 15, 1969. Cause of death: breast cancer. My hand shook as I picked up the last item in the box. A sealed envelope with "For Dorothy" written on the outside in Mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 3 weeks before Mother's death in 1995. Dorothy, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've somehow found Margaret's letters. I kept them because I couldn't bear to throw them away, but I couldn't bear to give them to you either. Your father and I believed we were protecting you from the scandal and shame of having an unwed sister. In those days, such things ruined entire families. But as the years went by, and especially after Margaret died, I began to realize we may have made a terrible mistake. I hope you can forgive us. I hope it's not too late for you to find Sarah. She would be 41 now, and according to Margaret's last letter, she became a teacher. I've enclosed the last address we had for her. Your loving mother, Eleanor Sinclair. The address was for Portland, Oregon, but it was from 1969. After 26 years, the chances of Sarah still living there were slim. But it was the only clue I had to finding my niece, the niece I'd never known existed. I climbed down from the attic in a daze, the box of letters clutched against my chest. My entire life had been built on a lie. Every family gathering where I'd sadly mentioned my late sister Margaret, every time I told people I was an only child after Mother and Father died, every moment I'd mourned the sister I thought I'd lost as a child, all of it had been based on a deception so profound it took my breath away. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at my parents, though their betrayal cut deep, but at the ripple effects of their decision. I'd lived my entire adult life believing I had no siblings, no extended family beyond my own children. I'd made decisions about my life, my family, my legacy, all based on incomplete information. More than that, somewhere out there was a woman named Sarah, my niece, who had grown up believing her mother's family had rejected her. Margaret's letters made it clear she told Sarah about us, had shared stories and photos and kept alive the hope that someday we'd be reunited. When Margaret died, Sarah would have been just 15 years old, probably hoping that her mother's family would step up and help her. But we never came. Because we never knew. I spent the next week in a fog of grief and rage. I found myself crying at random moments, in the grocery store when I saw a mother with her daughter, at church when the pastor talked about family forgiveness, late at night when the house felt too quiet and too full of lies all at the same time. My children noticed something was wrong immediately. Patricia called on Thursday to check on me. "Mom, you sound strange. Are you feeling all right?" I almost told her right then, but something held me back. Maybe it was the echo of Mother's voice talking about scandal and shame. Maybe it was my own need to process this revelation before sharing it. Or maybe deep down I was already planning something and didn't want anyone to talk me out of it. "I'm just tired, dear," I told Patricia. "It's nothing that a good night's sleep won't fix." But sleep didn't fix anything. If anything, the nights were worse. I'd lie in bed, the same bed where I'd grown up, where I'd dreamed of my sister Margaret for decades after her supposed death, and stare at the ceiling, wondering what my life would have been like if I'd known the truth. Would I have searched for Margaret? Would I have gone to Portland and found her, brought her home, helped her through her cancer treatment? Would I have been there when Sarah graduated high school, started college, got married? Would my own children have grown up knowing they had a cousin? The questions tormented me, but they also fueled a growing determination. I couldn't change the past, but I could change the present. I could find Sarah. I started with the internet, though at 73, I wasn't exactly computer savvy. My grandson Michael had given me a laptop for my birthday the year before, and I'd mostly used it for email and looking at photos. But now I had a mission. I spent hours learning to use search engines, typing in variations of Sarah Sinclair Portland, Oregon teacher, and getting thousands of results. I tried social media, though I barely understood how it worked. I even called directory assistants, though they told me they couldn't give out personal information. After a week of fruitless searching, I decided to take a more direct approach. I called the Portland Public School District and explained that I was looking for a teacher named Sarah Sinclair, who would have started working sometime in the 1970s or 1980s. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, "but we can't give out personal information about former employees. You could try writing to our main office with your request, but I can't guarantee they'll be able to help you." I wrote that letter immediately, explaining that I was looking for my niece for family reasons, but I knew it was a long shot. Bureaucracy moved slowly, and I was running out of patience. That's when I decided to call Margaret's last known neighbor. The 1969 address for Mother's letter was on Elm Street. I found the Portland phone book online and started calling every current resident on that street, explaining that I was looking for information about someone who had lived there in 1969. Most people hung up on me. A few were polite but unhelpful. But on my 15th call, an elderly man named Frank answered and actually listened to my story. "Sarah Sinclair," he repeated slowly. "You know, that name does sound familiar. My wife and I have lived on this street for 45 years, and I remember there was a young woman named Margaret who lived in the blue house on the corner. She had a daughter, I think. Died young, poor thing. But I remember the daughter stayed in the area for a while after her mother passed." My heart nearly stopped. "Do you remember anything about the daughter? What happened to her? Let me ask my wife. She's better with these things than I am." I heard muffled conversation in the background. Then a woman's voice came on the line. "Hello, dear. Frank tells me you're looking for Sarah Sinclair." "Yes, ma'am. She would be my niece, though I only just found out she exists." Oh my, what a story that must be. I do remember Sarah. Sweet girl, very smart. She went to college after her mother died, got a scholarship, I think. She used to come back and visit the old neighborhood every few years. But I haven't seen her in, it must be at least 10 years now. My heart sank, but I pressed on. "Do you know where she went to college? Or where she might be living now?" "She went to Oregon State, I believe. Studied education, wanted to be a teacher like her mother had been a nurse. But as for where she is now..." The woman paused. "You know what, dear? You should talk to Betty Morrison. She lives 3 houses down from where Margaret used to live, and she kept in touch with Sarah for years. Betty might have more recent information." Betty Morrison turned out to be a treasure trove of information. Not only did she remember Sarah, but she'd maintained a Christmas card relationship with her for decades. Sarah's a lovely woman, Betty told me. She did become a teacher just like she planned. Taught elementary school for 35 years before she retired. She never married, but she was very devoted to her students. She always talked about her mother with such love and respect. Do you have any way to contact her now? Well, I have her last address from her Christmas card. Let me find it. I held my breath while Betty searched. Finally, she came back on the line with an address in Salem, Oregon, about an hour south of Portland. Now I should warn you, Betty said gently. Sarah always believed her mother's family had rejected them both. Margaret never told her the full truth about why she was sent away. Sarah thinks you all knew about her and chose not to have contact. If you're really her aunt, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Of course Sarah would think we'd rejected her. From her perspective, her mother had been cast out by her family and died alone, and then that same family had ignored Sarah for decades. She had no way of knowing we thought Margaret was dead. I thanked Betty profusely and immediately sat down to write the most important letter of my life. How do you explain to a 65-year-old woman that her family didn't reject her, but instead were victims of a deception so complete that it had shaped decades of decisions? I started the letter a dozen times, crumpling up draft after draft. Finally, I decided to just tell the truth, all of it, exactly as I discovered it. Dear Sarah, I began, you don't know me, but I am your Aunt Dorothy. I am Margaret Sinclair's younger sister, and I have spent the past 69 years believing that your mother died in a car accident when she was 19 years old. I told her everything. About finding the letters, about learning that Margaret had lived for 15 years after her supposed death, about the birth certificate and death certificate hidden in that box. I explained how our parents had deceived not just Margaret, but me as well. I told her about all the milestones I'd missed, all the family gatherings where there should have been one more place set at the table. I also sent copies of several of Margaret's letters, the ones where she talked most lovingly about Sarah, where her pride in her daughter shone through every line. I wanted Sarah to know that her mother had never stopped hoping for a reunion, had never stopped believing that family mattered. The hardest part was admitting my own failures. I should have questioned their story more thoroughly, I wrote. I should have demanded to see records, to visit a grave, to have some proof beyond their word. But I was 8 years old when they told me you and your mother were gone, and by the time I was old enough to ask hard questions, I had accepted their version of events as fact. I am so deeply sorry for all the years we lost. I ended the letter with an invitation. If you're willing to meet me, I would like nothing more than to sit down with you and share stories about your mother. I have so many memories of her from our childhood, and I imagine you have stories about her adult life that I would treasure hearing. We can't get back the decades we lost, but maybe we can build something meaningful with the time we have left. I mailed the letter on a Friday, sent by certified mail so I'd know she received it. Then I waited, and waited. The longest week of my life crawled by with no response. On the following Friday, exactly a week after I'd mailed my letter, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. Is this Dorothy? The voice was shaky, uncertain, but there was something familiar about it. An echo of Margaret in the cadence, the careful pronunciation that our mother had drilled into all her children. Yes, this is Dorothy. This is Sarah. Sarah Sinclair. I got your letter. I started crying immediately right there on the phone. All the grief and joy and regret of the past few weeks hit me at once. Sarah, oh my God, Sarah. I can't believe I'm actually talking to you. She was crying too. I could hear it in her voice. I read your letter 5 times before I could believe it was real. All these years I thought you all knew about me and just didn't care. No, I said firmly. No, sweetheart. We never knew. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you. We talked for 2 hours that first phone call. Sarah told me about her childhood, about growing up with the knowledge that she had an aunt and grandparents who had supposedly rejected her and her mother. She told me about putting herself through college, about her 35 years of teaching, about the students who had become like children to her since she'd never had her own family. I always wanted to reach out, she admitted, especially after I became an adult, but I was scared of being rejected again. I figured if you hadn't wanted anything to do with us when Mom was alive, You certainly wouldn't want anything to do with me after she died. I told her about my own life, about my children and grandchildren who were about to learn they had family they never knew existed. I described Robert, my late husband, and how he would have absolutely loved having a niece to spoil. I painted pictures of family Christmases and birthdays, all the celebrations where Sarah should have been present. But the most important thing I told her was about Margaret, about the sister I remembered from childhood before she was sent away. Your mother was the kindest person I ever knew, I said. She was 4 years older than me, and she could have treated me like an annoying little sister, but she never did. She taught me to braid my hair, to ride a bicycle, to stand up for myself when kids at school were mean. When I had nightmares, she would sneak into my room and tell me stories until I fell asleep. She told me stories about you too, Sarah said softly. She said you were the smartest person she knew, and that you had the biggest heart. She said she hoped someday I could meet the aunt who would love me as much as she did. By the end of that phone call, we had made plans to meet in person. Sarah lived in Salem, about a 6-hour drive from my home, and she offered to drive up to see me. But I insisted on meeting her halfway. After 60 years of separation, I wasn't going to let her do all the work of bridging this gap. We agreed to meet at a restaurant in Eugene, Oregon, exactly halfway between our two cities. I would fly into Portland and drive down. She would drive up from Salem. We set the date for the following Saturday. I spent the week before our meeting in a whirlwind of preparation and anxiety. I gathered every photo I had of Margaret from our childhood, every story I could remember, every detail that might help Sarah understand what her mother had been like as a young woman. I also prepared myself mentally for the reality that Sarah might be angry, resentful, or emotionally distant. She had every right to be all of those things. But more than anything, I was excited. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving towards something positive, instead of just drowning in the shock of discovery. Of course, I also had to tell my own children about Sarah's existence. That conversation didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. Called Patricia first. Honey, I need to tell you something important about our family history. It's going to come as quite a shock. Mom, you're starting to worry me. What's going on? I told her everything just as I told Sarah. Patricia was quiet for a long time after I finished. Let me get this straight, she finally said. You're telling me that Grandma and Grandpa lied to you your entire life about having a sister who died? And now you've found this woman who claims to be her daughter. She doesn't claim to be anything, Patricia. I have proof. Birth certificates, death certificates, letters in your grandmother's own handwriting. This isn't a scam or a misunderstanding. This is family. But Mom, how do you know this woman is legitimate? How do you know she's not just some con artist who found out about our family history and is trying to take advantage of you? Patricia's skepticism hurt, but I understood it. The story was almost too incredible to believe, and she was trying to protect me. Because she knows things only Margaret's daughter would know, I explained. She has photographs, memories, stories that match perfectly with the letters I found. And besides, what would she be trying to con me out of? I'm 73 years old living on Social Security and Robert's pension. I'm hardly a wealthy target. My son Michael was more accepting when I called him, though he was equally shocked. Mom, this is incredible. I can't believe Grandma and Grandpa kept such a huge secret. But are you sure you're ready for this? Meeting someone who's essentially a stranger, even if she is family. She's not a stranger, Michael. She's my sister's daughter. She's your cousin. And yes, I'm sure. I've already lost 60 years with her. I'm not going to lose another day. The flight to Portland was the longest 3 hours of my life. I kept thinking about what I would say when I saw Sarah, how I would recognize her, whether she would look like Margaret or like me or like our parents. I had sent her recent photos of myself and she had done the same, but there's always that moment of uncertainty when you're meeting someone in person for the first time. I need not have worried. The minute I walked into that restaurant in Eugene, I knew exactly who she was. She was sitting at a corner table, nervously smoothing her hair, and she looked so much like Margaret at that age that it took my breath away. Same dark eyes, same thoughtful expression, same way of tilting her head when she was uncertain about something. She looked up when I approached the table, and her face broke into a smile that was pure Margaret. Aunt Dorothy. Sarah. I couldn't say anything else. I just opened my arms and she stood up and walked into them. And we held each other and cried right there in the middle of the restaurant while other diners pretended not to stare. We spent 4 hours in that restaurant, talking and crying and laughing and showing each other photographs. Sarah had brought a whole album of pictures from her mother's life after she left home. Margaret as a young nurse, Margaret in her small house in Portland, Margaret reading to a young Sarah, Margaret at Sarah's high school graduation, Margaret in the hospital during her final illness. She talked about you every day, Sarah told me. Even when she was dying, she was still hoping you would somehow find out the truth and come looking for me. She made me promise that if you ever did reach out, I would give you a chance to explain. I showed Sarah the photos I'd brought from our childhood. Margaret learning to drive in Father's old Ford, Margaret and me building a snowman in the backyard, Margaret in her high school graduation cap and gown just months before she was sent away. She looks so young, Sarah said softly, studying a picture of Margaret at 18. So hopeful. It breaks my heart to think about how scared she must have been when she found out she was pregnant. She was scared, I admitted. But she was also brave. The Margaret I remember would have handled it with grace and strength, just like she handled everything else in her life. Sarah told me about her career as a teacher, about the hundreds of students she'd influenced over the decades, about the quiet life she'd built for herself despite feeling like she had no family to share it with. I used to dream about having cousins, she said. Other kids would talk about big family gatherings, aunts and uncles and cousins, and I would wonder what that felt like. It was just me and Mom, and then just me after she died. You have cousins now, I told her. You have Patricia and Michael, and they have children too. You're second cousins. You have a whole family who wants to know you. We made plans for Sarah to come visit me in 2 weeks. She wanted to see the house where her mother had grown up, to stand in Margaret's childhood bedroom, and try to connect with that part of her history she'd never known. I wanted to introduce her to Patricia and Michael, to integrate her into the family gatherings she'd missed for 65 years. But first there was something I needed to do. Something that had been weighing on my mind since the day I found those letters. I needed to confront the people who had perpetuated this deception, even if they were no longer alive to defend themselves. The Monday after I met Sarah, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't visited their graves in over a year, but now I had things to say that couldn't wait any longer. I stood between their headstones, Eleanor Sinclair, beloved wife and mother, and Harold Sinclair, devoted husband and father, and I spoke to them as if they could hear me. I found the letters, I said out loud, not caring if anyone else in the cemetery thought I was crazy. I found all of Margaret's letters, and I found your letter too, Mother. I know what you did. I know about the lies, the deception, the way you robbed 3 generations of our family of the chance to know each other. I pulled out one of Margaret's letters, the one where she begged to come to my wedding, and read it aloud over their graves. She never stopped loving us, I continued. Even after you cast her out, even after you told the world she was dead, she never stopped believing in family. She was a better person than either of you deserved. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see an elderly man standing nearby. I'm sorry, he said gently. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just couldn't help but overhear, and I wanted to say that sometimes we have to speak our truth, even to people who can't respond. I nodded, wiping tears from my eyes. Thank you. I needed to say some things that should have been said a long time ago. Family can be complicated, he said. But it sounds like you're working to make things right. I'm trying to. I just hope it's not too late. It wasn't too late. Over the following months, Sarah became a regular part of our family. She came to stay with me for a week, sleeping in what had been Margaret's childhood bedroom, going through boxes of old photos and finding pictures of her mother she'd never seen before. Patricia and Michael were initially cautious about accepting Sarah, but that changed quickly once they met her. Patricia later told me, Mom, she's so obviously family. She has your gestures, your way of thinking things through before speaking. And when she talks about her students, she gets the same look in her eyes that you get when you talk about us. Sarah fit into our family dynamics as if she'd always been there. She came to Patricia's house for Thanksgiving, bringing Margaret's recipe for cornbread dressing that she'd carefully preserved all these years. She spent Christmas morning with us, opening gifts from nieces and nephews and great-nieces and great-nephews who treated her like the beloved aunt she'd always been meant to be. But the most meaningful moment came 6 months after we met, when Sarah and I went to Oregon together to visit Margaret's grave. I had never seen my sister's final resting place, had never been able to say goodbye properly. Sarah had been maintaining the grave for decades, bringing flowers on birthdays and holidays, keeping the headstone clean and readable. "I used to come here and tell her about my life," Sarah said as we stood beside the simple granite marker that read Margaret Rose Sinclair, 1935 to 1969, beloved mother and daughter. "I would tell her about my students, about my job, about the life I was building. But I also used to tell her that I hope someday she would be reunited with her family, even if it was just in whatever comes after this life." I knelt beside the grave and placed a bouquet of blue roses, Margaret's favorite flowers according to Sarah, next to the headstone. "I'm here now, Maggie," I whispered, using the nickname I'd called her as a child. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find the truth, but I'm here now. And I'm taking care of Sarah, just like you would have wanted." We stood there in silence for several minutes, two women separated by decades of deception, but united in our love for the remarkable person who connected us. Finally, Sarah spoke. She would be so happy to know we found each other. All those letters she wrote, all that hope she held on to, it wasn't wasted after all. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't wasted. And neither are we." The drive back to Sarah's house that day was filled with more stories, more sharing of memories and plans for the future. We talked about taking a trip together to see some of the places Margaret had written about in her letters. We discussed creating a photo album that would combine both of our collections of pictures, creating a complete visual history of our family that had been fractured for too long. Most importantly, we talked about the lessons this experience had taught us about truth, family, and the importance of questioning narratives that don't quite add up. "I think about all the decisions I made based on incomplete information," I told Sarah as we drove through the Oregon countryside. "All the times I told people I was essentially an only child. All the times I made choices about my life without knowing that you existed." "I think about that too," Sarah replied. "But I also think about how strong Mom was, how she built a good life despite being cut off from her family. She taught me that you can't control what other people do, but you can control how you respond to it. She taught you well." As we pulled into Sarah's driveway, she turned to me with a question that had clearly been on her mind all day. "Aunt Dorothy, what are you going to do about the house? The family home where all this started?" It was a question I'd been wrestling with for months. The house was full of memories, some good, some tainted by the discovery of the lies that had shaped my life. My children assumed I would leave it to them when I died, but now I understood that the decision was more complicated than that. "I've been thinking about that," I said slowly. "The house belongs to all of Margaret's family, not just the family that was allowed to stay. It belongs to you too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dorothy, I can't accept that. You've already given me so much just by finding me, by welcoming me into your family." "It's not about accepting anything," I told her firmly. "It's about justice. It's about making sure that the next generation knows the whole truth about our family, not just the sanitized version our parents wanted them to know." Over the following weeks, I worked with a lawyer to restructure my will. The house would be left to all three of Margaret's living descendants, Patricia, Michael, and Sarah, in equal shares. More than that, I established a trust fund using some of the savings Robert and I had accumulated over the years. The fund would be used to maintain the house as a kind of family gathering place, somewhere all of Margaret's descendants could come to connect with their history. But I also made another decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to tell the whole story publicly. It started with our church newsletter. Pastor Williams had asked me to write something for the monthly publication, and instead of the usual recipe or inspirational quote, I wrote about finding the letters and discovering Sarah. I explained how decades of family deception had robbed multiple generations of the chance to know each other, and how speaking truth, even difficult truth, was the only path to healing. The response was overwhelming. People from my church, from my community, from my past, reached out to tell me similar stories of family secrets and hidden truths. Several women my age admitted they had suspected their parents of lying about various family matters, but had never felt empowered to investigate. One woman, Helen, called to tell me that my story had inspired her to finally ask her older brother about discrepancies she'd noticed in family stories. I found out that our father had been married before and had a son who died in Vietnam, she told me. My brother had known for decades but thought I was too fragile to handle the truth. We're planning to visit his grave together next month. That's when I realized that the letter writing, the investigation, the reunion with Sarah, all of it was bigger than just my family. It was about the importance of truth in families, about the damage that well-meaning deceptions can cause, about the strength that comes from facing difficult realities instead of hiding from them. I started speaking at senior centers and community groups, telling the story of Margaret and Sarah, and encouraging other people to ask hard questions about their family histories. I talked about the difference between protecting someone and controlling their access to truth. My parents thought they were protecting me from the scandal of having an unwed sister, I would tell audiences. But what they were really doing was robbing me of the chance to make my own decisions about how to handle that knowledge. They took away my agency, my ability to choose love over judgment. The most rewarding part of these presentations was the conversations that happened afterward. Person after person would approach me with their own stories of family secrets, missing relatives, or nagging suspicions about official family narratives. A middle-aged man told me he'd always wondered why his family had no contact with his father's side of the family, and my story inspired him to hire a genealogist to investigate. He discovered that his father's family had disowned him for marrying outside their religion, and he was able to reconnect with cousins he'd never known existed. An elderly woman revealed that she'd suspected for years that her late husband had had a child from a previous relationship, but she'd never pursued it because she didn't want to stir up trouble. After hearing my presentation, she decided to look into it and discovered she had a stepdaughter who had been trying to find information about her father for decades. These stories confirmed what I'd learned from my own experience. Family secrets rarely protect anyone in the long run. They just create more pain, more confusion, and more missed opportunities for connection and love. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Sarah herself. 6 months after we'd met, she called me with news that changed everything. "Dorothy," she said, her voice shaking with excitement, "I have something to tell you about the letters." "What about them?" "I've been going through Mom's things more carefully since we met, and I found something. There are more letters." Letters she wrote but never sent. My heart stopped. "What kind of letters?" "Letters to you. Dozens of them, spanning from the time I was born until just before she died. She wrote to you regularly, telling you about my childhood, about her life, about how much she missed you. She just never had an address to send them to." Sarah had found a shoebox hidden in her mother's bedroom closet, behind a stack of old quilts. Inside were 57 letters addressed to my dearest sister Dorothy, chronicling Sarah's entire childhood from Margaret's perspective. "She wrote to you when I took my first steps, when I started school, when I lost my first tooth," Sarah told me. "She wrote about my achievements, my struggles, my personality. It's like she was having a conversation with you across all those years, even though she couldn't send the letters." Sarah mailed me copies of all 57 letters, and reading them was like getting to watch my niece grow up through my sister's eyes. Margaret had documented everything: Sarah's first words, Mama and Gamma, which Margaret explained was Sarah's attempt to say Grandma, her love of books and learning, her kindness to other children, her determination to become a teacher so she could help children the way she wished she could have been helped. One letter, written when Sarah was 12, particularly moved me. "Dorothy, I wish you could see how Sarah stands up for the underdog kids at school. Yesterday she invited the loneliest girl in her class to sit with her at lunch, and by the end of the week, Sarah had built a whole group of friends around this girl. She has such a generous heart, just like you did when we were children. I know you would love her so much if you could meet her." Another letter from Sarah's high school graduation broke my heart. "Dorothy, I watched Sarah walk across that stage today, and I thought about how proud you would be if you could see her. She's valedictorian just like you were, and she's going to college on a full scholarship. She wants to major in education because she says she wants to make sure no child ever feels as alone as we've felt. I wanted so desperately to call you and share this moment, but of course I have no way to reach you. I keep hoping that someday, somehow you'll find us." The final letter, written just 2 weeks before Margaret's death, was the most devastating. "Dorothy, I'm dying, and the hardest part isn't leaving Sarah alone, though that breaks my heart. It's knowing that you'll never know she existed. She's the best thing I ever did with my life, and I wish I could give her to you as a gift. She would love you so much and you would love her. Please, if there's any way this letter could ever reach you, find her. Take care of her. She's all that's left of us, and she deserves to know she comes from a family that values love and kindness and standing up for what's right." Reading those letters was like getting to know Margaret as an adult, as a mother, as a woman who had built a meaningful life despite the rejection and betrayal she'd experienced. It was also like getting to watch Sarah grow up through the eyes of someone who loved her unconditionally. But more than that, it was proof that love transcends deception. Margaret had never stopped loving me, never stopped hoping for reconciliation, never stopped believing in the importance of family. Even when she couldn't reach me, she had maintained our relationship through these one-sided letters. I shared this discovery during one of my community presentations, and afterward, a woman in her 40s approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "My mother died 5 years ago, and we've been estranged for the last 10 years of her life because of a family conflict that seemed impossible to resolve. I've been carrying so much guilt about things left unsaid. But maybe, like your sister, she understood more about love and forgiveness than I gave her credit for." That conversation made me realize that Margaret and Sarah's story wasn't just about family secrets. It was about the enduring nature of love, about how connection can survive even decades of separation and misunderstanding. It was also about the importance of not waiting until it's too late to seek truth and reconciliation. Now, a year after finding those letters in my attic, my life looks completely different than it did before. Sarah and I talk on the phone every few days, sharing daily details that we should have been sharing for decades. She's become not just my niece, but one of my closest friends and confidants. She's also become an integral part of our extended family. My grandchildren adore their great-aunt Sarah, and she spoils them with the kind of attention and affection that comes from someone who thought she'd never have family to love. Patricia and Michael have both told me that having Sarah in their lives has enriched their understanding of family history and the importance of maintaining connections. But perhaps the most significant change is in how I approach truth and relationships in general. I no longer accept family stories at face value without asking questions. I encourage my children and grandchildren to dig deeper into family history, to ask uncomfortable questions, to seek documentation for claims that seem unusual or incomplete. More importantly, I've become an advocate for honesty in families, even when that honesty is difficult or uncomfortable. I speak regularly at senior centers and community groups about the importance of sharing family truth with adult children, about the damage that secrets can cause across generations, about the strength that comes from facing difficult realities together. The house where I found those letters has been renovated to serve as a gathering place for all of Margaret's descendants. Sarah helped me go through decades of accumulated belongings, sorting family treasures from simple clutter. We found more photographs, more documents, more evidence of the rich family history that had been hidden from view. We also created a memory room dedicated to Margaret, displaying her nursing school graduation photo, some of her favorite books, the letters she wrote but never sent, and photographs of her with Sarah throughout the years. It's become a place where family members can go to feel connected to the aunt and sister we lost too soon. But the most meaningful addition to the house is a simple framed quote hanging in the living room. "Truth delayed is not truth denied." It's a reminder that even when deception seems to have permanently altered the course of family history, love and honesty can still create paths toward healing and connection. Looking back on this entire experience, I'm struck by how much my parents' well-intentioned deception cost all of us. They thought they were protecting me from scandal and shame, but they were actually robbing me of the chance to make my own decisions about how to handle difficult family realities. They were denying Sarah the family support she deserved after losing her mother at such a young age. They were preventing their grandchildren from knowing their cousin, and their great-grandchildren from having another loving great-aunt in their lives. Most significantly, they were denying themselves the joy and redemption that could have come from welcoming Margaret and Sarah back into the family fold. By the time Margaret was an adult woman with a career and a daughter to be proud of, the original scandal of her teenage pregnancy would have seemed relatively minor compared to the love and strength she had demonstrated in building a meaningful life. But I've also learned that it's never too late to choose truth over deception, connection over estrangement, love over fear. Finding Sarah didn't bring Margaret back, but it restored a part of our family that had been missing for decades. It gave all of us, Sarah included, the gift of knowing we belonged to something larger than ourselves, The letters in my attic exposed a family deception that had shaped 3 generations of decisions and relationships. But they also revealed an unshakable foundation of love that had survived decades of separation and silence. Margaret never stopped loving her family, never stopped hoping for reconciliation, never stopped believing in the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. Finding those letters changed everything, but not in the way I expected when I first opened that box. The deception was devastating, but the love was transformative. The secrets were painful, but the truth was liberating. The lost years were heartbreaking, but the found relationship was miraculous. Today, when people ask me about the most important lesson I've learned from this experience, I tell them this: family isn't just about blood or legal connections. It's about choosing to show up for each other, to seek truth together, to create space for love even when love seems impossible. Margaret did that through 15 years of letters to a family that seemed to have rejected her. Sarah did that by agreeing to meet the aunt she'd never known. And I'm trying to do that by making sure no family secret in our line ever again robs people of the chance to love each other. The letters in my attic exposed decades of deception, but they also revealed that love, real, unconditional, persistent love, can survive anything. Even lies, even rejection, even death. That's the legacy Margaret left us. And it's the legacy I'm determined to pass on to future generations of our family. The day I found those letters, I thought my world was crumbling. Now I know it was actually being rebuilt on a foundation of truth and love that's stronger than any deception could ever be. And that makes all the pain, all the searching, all the difficult conversations completely worthwhile. Because Sarah and I found each other, and through each other we found our way back to Margaret and to the family we were always meant to be.